The original Xenoblade Chronicles was a wonderful RPG for a console that was sorely lacking in them. Its compelling story, wonderful writing, and fun MMO-like gameplay made for one of the Wii's best and most unique titles. 5 years later, at the Nintendoswitch reveal presentation, fans of the original would be treated to a trailer for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, slated for a release later that same year. Despite the excitement, though, the game wasn't without controversy. The more anime art style and certain character designs didn't exactly leave a good first impression on some people, with the game's main pair, Pyra and Rex, being the designs in question. Despite that, the game released to positive reviews from critics. Fans, on the other hand, were a little divisive on 2, as I remember it. People weren't a fan of how upfront 2 was with its fan service as opposed to 1's fan service, and the designs for some of the female characters turned some people off for being too provocative or unrealistic, and the game's inability to properly explain its mechanics made a lot of people get a very poor impression of how 2 actually plays, making for a much slower and boring experience than what was ever intended. This isn't all of the issues people had with it, but I'm sure you get the point by now. The game had a lot going against it at the start, and there was a lot about the game that left people with a pretty sour impression on what I believe to be a genuinely great sequel that in some ways is better than even the original. So let's take a look at everything Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has to offer, both the good and the bad. Cause while it may be in my top 5 favorite games ever made, I can't say the initial controversy isn't completely unfounded. Let's get started. Welcome to the world of Alrest, where clouds float on the ocean 24/7, letting children as young as 10 deep-sea dive into the ocean for sunken parts and treasure as a career is socially acceptable, and the ground you stand on has a built-in, unescapable expiration date. Yeah, similarly to the first game with the Bionis and Mechonis, the residents of Alrest live on and in the bodies of massive animal-like titans. Unlike the former, though, these guys aren't gods. They're the servants of the creator of Alrest, the Architect, who sent them down to aid humanity when they were cast out of his home, Elysium. With the Titans starting to die out, a young salvager named Rex sets out with the help of Pyra, a special blade known as the Aegis, and climbing the World Tree to reach Elysium, after a salvaging job went, less than stellar for him. Don't worry, kid. Shonen protagonists get impaled all the time. I'm sure you can walk it off. The game doesn't exactly play up how bad things are getting for humanity, though. In Uriah, we see civilians having to line up to get government-provided rations, but because of how thin resources are, they operate under a first-comes, first-served policy. The Ardanian Empire's Titan gets hotter and hotter as it reaches the end of its lifespan, making growing food there functionally impossible, meaning they have to use the Titan of Gormott to grow their own food, and in the event their Titan dies, a new and, very temporary home. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 isn't exactly shy about showing how much fighting there would have to be in a situation like this, though, as Uriah and Morardain are seemingly on the verge of war, and if the many refugees on Indal from the last major conflict are any indication, it probably won't be the last. All of this is painted in a very morally gray light, since really no one here is at fault. Who could blame Morardain for fighting Gormott for control of the land when they're incapable of producing their own food? And a similar case can seemingly be made for Uriah as well. All of this reinforces Team Aegis's end goal: find Elysium, since with the current state of the world, there's literally no better options available to them. Honestly, I think the world building in 2 is better than what it was in the original, with them expanding more on the humans' culture than the Hans. Here, we learn a little bit about each Titan you visit along your journey to help make the world come together a bit more. Like how Morardain's heat issue does have a silver lining, with the Titan's body temperature being perfect for geothermal energy, allowing them to become a major military powerhouse, as an example. All of this is the grander scope of things. None of this is talking about the other most important aspect of the game's story: drivers and their blades. Scattered throughout Alrest are core crystals, objects that contain life forms known as blades, beings born from titans that assist the humans they've resonated with. Now, what this means for you, the player, is a lot of things, but let's save the combat for later and delve into the game's exploration. When running around Alrest, blades can help you with gathering collectibles with certain field skills. When interacting with certain spots in the field, you'll get a random set of items depending on the spot, and if you have a blade with the corresponding field skill, there's a chance it'll activate and you'll get another round of collectibles, with the effect stacking if it triggers for multiple blades. The issue with field skills is everything else, though. While this is never a problem in story progression, with optional side stuff, there will inevitably come a point where you're trying to get through some kind of obstacle, only for you to be lacking in one or more areas. This can be frustrating when you want to open something as simple as a chest, only for you to be unable to do so and will have to come back at some point later when you have the level of skill necessary to open it. It can also be tedious in some cases, like when you have all the points necessary with your various blades, but you have to swap them into your party to have those skills active and then swap them back out when you're done. I mean, the exploration in 2 is pretty much better by default, with it actually having reasons for you to explore at all beyond unique monsters, but the field skills are definitely holding it back from being truly great. Xenoblade X, this game is not. For real though, I love how they improved exploration in this game compared to the first one. In the first game, areas felt unnecessarily big because of how little there actually was defined, so while they were beautiful, they were pretty bare on a gameplay level. Here, areas are generally smaller and are filled with little secrets you can find, like chests. Like I said before, it's not perfect, but it's a really good improvement over the first game's areas. Also, on an unrelated note, can we talk about how much better the heart-to-hearts are? They removed the dumb affinity requirements, so that way you can actually view these things without having to farm for collectibles, and the added voice acting really helps to make them a bit more engaging for me. Okay, so we need to get this out of the way before we go anywhere else in this video. Let's talk about the fan service in the room. Some of the designs for the female characters have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and while I personally don't care about it one way or the other, I'm not gonna pretend like I don't understand. While her artwork is fine, Dahlia's 3D model definitely could have used some tweaking, and with Newt being an Ardanian military buff, her choice of outfit is oddly lacking in clothing, and while I disagree with the idea that their designs don't match their personality, I can kinda see why Pyra or Mithra's outfits would bother some people, even if I personally kinda like them. Point here being, if this stuff genuinely bothers you, then that is perfectly fine, and if you like this sort of thing, that's also fine. At the end of the day, it's all subjective. You're not wrong for liking or disliking the fan service. For me, I only ever have a problem with it when that's all a character is, or if it's taken too far for me. Or if it's unequal fan service. Yeah, the variety of blades is my biggest issue with them for 2 different reasons. One being that they're predominantly women. You see, every side quest and gacha blade in the game was designed by an artist outside of Monolith Soft, and from how I understand it, they were given almost complete freedom for what they could do. This meant we had mostly female and humanoid blades, with next to no men and no 4-legged beast blades besides Dromark. And while I do like a lot of these designs, especially Adenines and Cassandra's as well as Brigid's, I can't help but wish there were 2 things. First off, I would have loved a sword-carrying doggo for a blade. Is it a trope? Yes, but it's a cool trope. And second, as mentioned previously, the lack of male blades in the game makes the fan service feel a bit uneven. Look, all I'm saying is that I'm sure there's a big group of people out there who would love it if the game had a himbo blade or a charming regal blade that isn't Duggus. I mean, hey, if you like him, that's fine. Not gonna pretend like I even remotely understand, but more power to you. The other problem I have may very well just be a me thing, but I almost wish the game, instead of having a gacha system, had a smaller pool of story and optional blades you could obtain. Part of the issue for me is that once you actually understand the game's mechanics and have played through the game even once, you'll probably find yourself using a lot of the same blades in future playthroughs, because not all of these guys are created equally. Some of the blades you get in the game are just better than others, and a lot of said blades you'll get throughout the main story. Rex's lineup of blades actually remain the same through most of the adventure with me, with him using Pyra and Mithra since they can't be disengaged and are some of the best blades in the game, Adenine, who I pulled pretty early on, and Wulfric since he's great on Rex. I only really changed his lineup once late in the game, and a similar case can be made for every other member of the party. With Nia being the healer of the group, I primarily stuck her with blades good for that job and avoided anything that would draw aggro to her. Dora straight up can't have anything beyond Poppy equipped to him, more on that later, and the same reason I gave for Rex can be applied to every other party member. That and the fact that after 25-30 hours I stopped getting rares from core crystals doesn't exactly help. Yeah, sometimes RNG is just not on your side in this game. You may very well experiment on a first playthrough, but for me, after that first playthrough, 80% of the blades I used remained the same, and I think another part of the reason why this is because there are just some roles your other drivers just aren't meant to fill. Rex, Zeke, and Morag can all DPS and tank just fine when built right, with Morag being able to do both at the same time due to how strong Brigid is. But outside of the crit healing strategy and arts that create healing potions, they're not the best healers. Nia is the reverse issue. She can do nice damage, but she's very much built specifically to be your party healer, and while you can give her blades with high damage outputs, you run the risk of her potentially drawing aggro, and let me tell ya, Nia ain't exactly tanky. The shining point in 2's favor, though, is how it handles customization in every other aspect of its gameplay. Instead of equipping your characters with armor, you instead give them accessories and aux cores. In the case of the former, every character has 2 slots to equip accessories in, and while a lot of them can be simple stat buffs, some have other effects like items that boost the effect of healing arts, or even giving the player the ability to heal a bit of HP back when they crit. The aux cores, on the other hand, are meant for your blades, and these can be as simple as boosting their block and crit rates, boosting their damage output if certain conditions are met, to even reducing or increasing aggro buildup. I actually like this more than the gems in 1, because this allows a bit more creativity in how you build your characters, and opens the door for more strategy in your setup. Beyond that, you also have the affinity charts for both drivers and blades. Unlike the skill trees in the last game, the affinity chart has 3 different levels of skills unique to each driver. Here it tries to go for something much simpler than what the skill tree was, and I kinda like that. The blade affinity charts are a bit more complicated, however. Every blade will have 3 different colored nodes on their chart, red for specials, yellow for battle skills, and green for field skills. Unlocking other nodes or tiers for their chart will require you to do any number of things. For raising their affinity level, it's usually as simple as increasing their trust through side quests, the use of specials, and pouch items, which are something we'll go over later. The nodes, though, vary greatly on the blade. It can involve killing a certain number of a specific enemy type, performing a certain amount of blade or driver combos, to really anything. Thinking about it, this is probably another reason why I don't experiment with my blades a ton, because raising their affinity levels and filling out their blade charts can be kinda tedious if you're wanting to use a lot of different blades for each character. Well, at the very least, having a lot of spare blades is great for the game's merc missions. Yeah, there's not too much to actually say here. After a certain point, you get access to them and can send out a group of spare blades on timed missions that'll run in the background while you play to get some nice little rewards. It's not much, but it's neat, I suppose. Okay, so there's actually one more blade-related thing to talk about, and I saved the best for last. Everyone's favorite cinnamon roll, Poppy. Poppy is the world's first artificial blade, and as such, she works a little bit differently from a normal blade. Instead of having aux cores, Poppy can swap out some of her parts in Poppy Swap. Here you can change her roll CPU, add in new slots for skill RAM, basically her aux cores, and even the effects of her specials. While I never changed out her roll CPU for anything not tank related due to how Poppy's arts and stats are built, her skill RAMs and special enhancing RAMs were something I could see people messing around with a lot because of just how much customization Poppy Swap offers. Now the one problem with all of this is the fact that in order to get ether crystals and parts for Poppy at all is to play Tiger Tiger. Basically, Tora's Grandpapawn thought it would be a good idea to store mass quantities of every possible part upgrade for Poppy, as well as a large fortune of ether crystals in an arcade machine of all things. The goal of Tiger Tiger is simple. Make it to the bottom of the level while killing enemies and collecting chests and ether crystals along the way to get the big chest at the bottom, then swim back up to the top. I actually kinda enjoyed playing Tiger Tiger, but I can see why people have a problem with this. Now, full transparency here, I did use the expansion pass rewards to make things a bit easier on me in the upgrade department for Poppy, so I didn't have to grind nearly as much as what you normally might. Tiger Tiger doesn't give a ton of ether crystals, and any parts you receive from chests at the end are in fact random. And while you can create parts using the ether crystals you get, your options for what you can make are limited until you get one of the game's tech manuals. They're spaced out kind of far from each other and where you can find them, so if you're wanting to get a Tank Mod 3 before roughly the end of Chapter 4, you'll need to fish it out of Tiger Tiger, and I can admittedly see why that would be frustrating. Alright, so I think it's time we mentioned the other biggest criticism this game gets a lot, and for me, it's probably the biggest sin this game commits. The absolutely horrendous tutorials and how it ruins the incredibly fun gameplay for a lot of people. Let me just say that I think Chronicles 2 has an incredibly fun and rewarding battle system. Getting a good synergy for the different element blades on your team allows you to set things like blade combos up faster, and allows you to have longer chain attacks for a ton of bonus XP if you overkill them. And the more fast-paced combat compared to 1 makes fights a bit quicker and more engaging. But with the way the game handles its tutorials and how it conveys information to the player, a lot of that doesn't matter because new players probably won't get that experience. The issues start as early as the game's first hour with your first introduction to pouch items. Pouch items are timed buffs that can have any number of effects, such as damage reduction. The item used as your example is one of 3 fish items that you can buy from the vendor at Argentum. This is a terrible set of items to use as an example to the player this early. March back downstairs to the first floor and talk to the dessert shop owner, Bonbon. Congratulations, you've just now met your new best friend, because dessert items are so good, there is absolutely no reason you shouldn't be using them the entire game. See, the thing with desserts is, even at their worst, they charge all your arts by at least 0.1 every second if you're feeling like a cheapskate. The Narciper Jelly, on the other hand, is so good I used it for the entire game, and with the money you're given at the start, you can afford 2 of them and they each last a little more than an hour. See, the Narciper Jellies recharge arts by 0.4 every second, and gives you some damage reduction, and while yes, they're kinda pricey, the point here is that any one of the dessert items would have been a much better example to show to the player, because the game's first 3 chapters are mechanically the slowest, due to how late they give you access to certain mechanics, like chain attacks and a full blade roster. And playing through these first 3 chapters without a dessert as your pouch item turns it into kind of a slog. Then there's the fact that all blades are described as either a tank, attacker, or healer, and the problem is that this can be very, very misleading. Just because a blade is a tank doesn't mean it can't be used as a DPS, and some healer blades, like Adenine, are definitely not built as a healer because she's capable of some pretty potent damage with 2 of her 3 battle skills. All a blade's classification determines is what bonuses you get from having them in your roster. There are just some things the game straight up just doesn't tell you, like how good fusion combos are. See, in combat, when you use one of a blade's specials, you can trigger a blade combo, and by using a specials of increasing levels for that route, you can end with a final attack that can deal incredible damage to the enemy. Driver combos, things like break and topple if you've played the first game, can be stacked with this to make a fusion combo, with each stage of the driver combo giving a different bonus effect. The break fusion combo lets blade combo attacks deal 50% more damage, so long as break is in effect. Then there's the fact that not every blade special attack is made equal. Like, it would be great to know that Pyra's level 3 has an extra 25% chance to crit since its bonus effect is increased crit damage, making it an amazing special to use for ending a fire blade combo, since she also gets increased blade combo damage, but no, I guess that's not important enough to tell the player. This isn't all of the problems it has with explaining, but we'd be here longer than necessary if I explained all of it. Honestly, if you could at the very least review the tutorials, this might make up for some of it, but no, you can't even do that. And again, it's a shame it has to be this way, because I truly believe that 2 has better gameplay than 1 for how much faster paced it is and how rewarding chain attacks are. Going into a boss fight and getting 3 combos off to spawn 3 elemental orbs to break during a chain attack is very satisfying, and makes you think a bit about what blades you bring with you, because a blade will always prioritize the elemental orb of the opposing element, and will do 2 of the 3 necessary hits to break them for more damage and turns in a chain attack. And having a blade use a special that isn't posing any of the orbs will pick 1 at random and only do 1 point of damage to it. I don't know if I'm explaining all this the best, but the point here is there's enough strategy and setup and prioritization of what blades to swap to at any given moment that it makes 2's gameplay far more engaging for me than 1's, because I have more to think about in the moment. But you can't have a game with this much depth and complexities to its gameplay and have bad tutorials. For as much as I love this game with all of my heart, this issue is easily the biggest sin the game commits, and is probably the largest reason why some people either didn't enjoy the game or straight didn't finish it. I was one of those people back when the game released in 2017, and only picked it back up a while ago thanks to Chugga Conroy's Let's Play of the game, informing me of what I initially did wrong. And I'm so glad he made that, because if he didn't, I wouldn't have gotten to experience its wonderful story and characters. Let's get any and all problems I have with the game's story out of the way now, because I got a lot of praises to sing for it. First off, let's talk about Rock, cause wow did they get shafted. I mean, after that little filler bit with the brigands, Rock doesn't show up at any other point in the game's story, which is really weird, because in Spirit Crucible Elpis, we see Rex use Rock's dual scythes, but they're nowhere to be found in the actual cutscene. If they're going to make Rock a blade that Rex is required to resonate with, either use them in the story or don't have them usable at all, because with how bad they are in a gameplay level, it's not like I'm using them. Ugh, why didn't they keep you as a launch blade? We already get a guaranteed smash blade in Chapter 4 with QT, it would have worked so much better. Secondly, Torna as a villain group is very okay. Malice is very well written, and I love his relationship with Amalthus, as it implies that if anyone else had resonated with him, we would have a very different story. And it honestly makes me feel kinda bad for him, since he's pretty much an unwilling monster. By the way, who else had a big "I'm sorry, what" moment when Malice started using Monado arts for the first time? Caught me way off guard. Jin I do really like, but his character does confuse me a bit, and I think they made him too powerful with him being able to move at the speed of light. The speed of sound would have worked much better in my opinion, while still keeping him more powerful than base Rex. Side note, if he can move at the speed of light, why didn't he kill Amalthus sooner? I mean, I know it damages his core crystal every time he uses it, but in 500 years you'd think he'd have enough goes in him to use at least one to kill the guy who effectively ruined his life by murdering his driver. This isn't a complaint at all, just a question I've always had. Mikhail's really cool by the end, but I don't think he gets enough screen time in the base game compared to what Jin and Malos get. Heck, I think A.K.A actually gets more time than him, and it's A.K.A. The guy that next to Petroka is one of the weakest members of the group narratively. Honestly, I wish these guys got their own version of Torna to flesh them out more, cause they really needed it, especially A.K.A and Petroka. Third, while the story is very, very good, it does take a while to start really hitting you with its best compared to the first game, making the first 3 chapters, while still fun, narratively as well as mechanically the slowest part of the game. I mean, honestly, the pacing in general is definitely worse here than the first games. Finally, the fight with Artifice Ion is kinda underwhelming. That's not bad by any means, I just wish it was more than just Yaldabaoth 2, but kinda worse. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about our man of the hour, Rex himself, cause while I can understand why some people may not like him that much compared to Shulk, I don't think the kid gets enough credit. Rex is, in my opinion, just as strong of a protagonist as what Shulk was, but for different reasons. Through Shulk's journey, it was about how the people around him changed him and his viewpoints over the course of the game. He got the most development in the game, where the other members of the party got smaller or simpler yet still effective character arcs. Rex is the exact opposite of Shulk, where instead of a pessimist who changes greatly over the adventure, he's a naive, optimistic kid who acts as the beacon of hope and light needed to help the other members of the cast grow and develop throughout the story. Sure, Zeke doesn't get much in the way of development, but he works just fine as a static character, since despite the fact that he's played as a comedic character, he has a lot of wisdom to be shared. Morag is in a similar boat to Zeke, but with her being the Dunban of the game, she's so cool and well written. I'm perfectly fine with it. She also happens to have my favorite heart-to-heart in the game, where when cooking with Pyra, she and Bridget freak out when trying to gut a monkfish and end up incinerating it with her arts. While I can understand why some people wouldn't be the biggest fan of Rex, as he's a very different kind of protagonist compared to Shulk, I think he works just as well as him. On an unrelated note, I will actually be very angry if in Chronicles 3, there is no mention of the play for Berdom Minoth wrote anywhere in Agnes. That man was too cool for us to not at least get a mention of that having been written. By the way, going back to the subject of comparing characters from the first game and this one, does anyone else like Amalthus as a twist villain more than Zanza? Like, I'll give credit where credit is due. Klaus is a great character, and makes Zanza a bit more interesting, but only as a thing that exists in this world, not as a character. Amalthus' motivations for why he did what he did had far more development than anything Zanza got. I stand by what I said in my video on 1. Zanza is a plot twist in the shape of a character. On a different note, though, for as much crap as Tora is given, I actually kinda like him. He's no fatherly saint like Ricky was, but I like him all the same. And to be fair, with his love of all things moe, he's like 13, 14 years old and clearly learned his love for this stuff from his dad. I think we can cut him a little slack here. Besides, anyone who can make the world's greatest high-in-iron cinnamon roll that is Poppy can't be that bad. Seriously though, I love Poppy. She's probably my second favorite character in the game. She is absolutely adorable and incredibly awesome all at the same time. I don't know if I've ever seen a robot in an RPG that radiates nearly as much humanity as Poppy.
Poppy made promise. Mithra say that Rex for sure asked Poppy.
Nope, not gonna cry. I can take it. Seriously though, I'm genuinely worried that the scene where Mithra promises to Poppy that she'll destroy her if she somehow starts trying to destroy the world will somehow be foreshadowing something in 3. I really don't want to have to see the cinnamon roll kick the bucket. But hey, unlike Poppy, we at least know Nia's going to be back for 3, which is great because I loved everyone's favorite Welsh cat girl. You see, beyond the fact that she has a wonderful amount of sass, Nia works perfectly as a metaphor for being able to accept yourself and not living in fear of who you are. And I really like how in the hot springs scene, her being a flesh eater is foreshadowed in such a way that you could initially interpret her conversation with Mithra as Nia secretly being a boy, which really helps bring the metaphor home in my opinion. I'd also just like to point out that, for once, we have an anime RPG where we have a fanservice-y bath scene that doesn't involve peeping toms or some kind of misunderstanding, and it's instead relevant to the plot. Japanese developers out there, take notes, cause this is how scenes like this should be handled. The only other thing I wish they did was have a heart-to-heart open up after Rex's nightmare scene in Elysium, where she and him actually have a chat about what she said in the Crucible. Cause I don't know about you, but Rex seems pretty hung up over turning her down, and that is a conversation I would have loved to see. And now, for the final and most important point for why I love the story so much, we have Pyra and Mithra. Pyra and Mithra are two of my favorite female characters, both for how well they're written, and because, well, I kinda relate to them. Forgive me if I get a little personal here, or if this turns into a pseudo-PSA at some point, but I feel too strongly about the subject matter to not delve a bit deeper into this. Also, I won't be talking about everything involving their character here, since Torn of the Golden Country is coming right after this video, and I don't want to repeat myself, so if it seems like I'm skimming over a few details, that's why. Pyra and Mithra's depression and the trauma they went through during the Aegis War is foreshadowed very well throughout the entire game. It starts pretty simple, with Azurda asking if just going to Elysium was what she really intends to do. The player wouldn't think much of it, but then, many hours later, you get to this scene.
So maybe Rex is better off without me. Rex, and the whole world, they don't need me. That's just how it feels.
It's at this point, and especially later in the story, with the latter, that the player may realize that Pyra and Mithra suffer from depression and PTSD from the events of Torna, where they sunk the country's Titan. Looking back at previous scenes in the game with this knowledge in mind, it really changes how you look at Pyra and Mithra. Like how Pyra apologizes a lot. This is a detail some people may not pick up on looking back on it, but as someone who's dealt with depression for a good chunk of his life, this was me. I was a Pyra to my family. I apologized for everything, even if it didn't make sense to do so. Honestly, the title of the game's 7th chapter, The Fear She Carries, while having a perfect double meaning since it references Nia as well, also refers to a big part of their problem. They're terrified of the power they possess, and are scared of the thought that they may cause another Torna, and that's a big reason why they wanted to ask the Architect to let them die when they get to Elysium. This perfectly culminates with the end of Chapter 7, where Rex, realizing how much of a goober he was being, not paying close enough attention to his girlfriends, addresses the issue and tells them he won't sit by and let the people he loves suffer, and promises they won't let the world burn a second time, effectively trying to help carry the burden of their fear for them. Mad props to Sky Bennett, the voice actors for both Pyra and Mithra, by the way. I know the voice acting can get a bad rep for, well...
Pyra, Mithra, join me!
Kinda understandable reasons, but she manages to give very good yet also unique performances for them. Honestly, the entire cast needs props. Every one of these guys does a great job. The only other thing I wish they did was have a heart-to-heart where Rex checks to see if they're okay after the Numa scene and make sure they know they can talk to him about these things in the future, since they did admit to being suicidal. But hey, maybe that's just my own experiences talking. For real though, Morag needs to use her political influence to find these two really good therapists, cause trauma and depression does not go away in a day. There is only so much an emotional support Rex can do for your health, and the same goes for anyone else here watching. I can't emphasize enough the importance of taking care of yourself and getting mental help when you need it. I was at a breaking point for years, and for one reason or another, I didn't get the help I needed as quickly as I should have. And I can't help but wonder how much better I'd feel today if I just got it sooner. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is easily one of my favorite games ever made. It fixes basically every problem I had with the original, with improved exploration, aside from the field skills, and more in-depth and engaging combat. The game's not without its issues though. While it adds some replayability, the blade system as is definitely could use a bit of work, cause I almost feel like it would have been better with a smaller pool of obtainable blades than the current gacha system. And while I don't care too much about it, I can understand why some of the designs could be an issue for some. The tutorials in Chronicles 2 are inexcusably bad at explaining how the game's mechanics work to the player. Like I said before, you can't have tutorials this awful when your gameplay has this much depth to it. But honestly, the game's highs are so high for me that it's easily my favorite in the series, tied only with its DLC game, which, as mentioned previously, we'll go over in the next video. And let me tell ya, I've got nothing but praise for this game. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.